Unbelievable. Hey, what's up everybody? Brian here with Practically Biblical, and today we're starting a new series of videos on some of the most unbelievable stories in the Bible. And by that, I mean those stories that both capture our imaginations, wow, that's unbelievable, but also challenge our intellect. Nope, unbelievable. These are stories that build the faith of some and serve as a stumbling block to others. Today we're starting all the way back at the beginning with the story of creation in Genesis 1. This one's gonna make some people mad. Hey, welcome to my channel. Here at Practically Biblical, we're all about sharing stories of Scripture through creative teaching and offering practical tools, tips, and insights to help you grow in your knowledge and understanding of the Bible. So if that's something you're looking for, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications for new content every Wednesday. If you grew up in the church, you almost certainly are familiar with the stories in the early chapters of Genesis. The stories of creation and Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit, Cain killing Abel, Noah building an ark, and the great flood, and then the strange story of the Tower of Babel. These stories were fun and they captured our childhood imaginations. But at some point, you were presented with new information that seemed to contradict the reality of those stories, so you started to question. Things weren't adding up, so maybe you began asking those questions of your parents or others in your Christian sphere of influence, and found that you either got shut down or no one had any good answers for you. You were told to just believe. The implication was that doubt wasn't acceptable, and turning to science was dangerous and was in direct conflict with your faith. And you shouldn't do that. It seemed the only place you could really find answers was in your textbooks or online or in the classroom. And it wasn't necessarily that those answers were intended to rip you away from your faith, but no one offering those answers were there to help you reconcile your questions with your faith. And so the gap widened and your faith withered. And maybe that's where you are now. The stories that you used to find incredible and unbelievable are now the same stories you find incredibly unbelievable. Before we get into today's content, let me know if you have particular passages that you've wrestled with that you'd like to see be a part of this series. Drop me a note in the comments as you watch, or send me a DM over on Instagram with the passage and any questions you may have about it. I can't promise I'll be able to get to them all or do them all justice, but I will do what I can, and your thoughts may just stir some future content here on the channel. Now, one of those stories for a lot of people is the account of creation in Genesis 1. So I want to take a look at this story to see what's going on and what it's communicating. As we read it in any English translation, we read an intro to the effect of, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." And then the story goes on, which we'll get into in just a second, to talk about what exactly God created. And the text states that God created it all in the course of a 6-day period, which is precisely where it becomes problematic. And we get arguments of faith versus science, natural versus supernatural, and literal versus allegorical. The theories and belief systems splinter in all sorts of directions from there, and they fascinate me. So much so that I've spent a great deal of time studying both the scriptures as well as scientific texts and theories. I'm by no means an expert in all of it, but I do have degrees in both biology and theology. I've studied evolutionary theory and biblical creationism. I've read Charles Darwin. I'm familiar with both macro and microevolution and adaptation among the species. I've researched old Earth creationism and young Earth creationism. I've written papers on intelligent design and on Big Bang cosmology. I mention all of that not to puff myself up and pat myself on the back, but to simply say that I'm not speaking from a place of ignorance on this topic. All of the conflict stems from an understanding that Genesis 1 and 2 is intended to communicate the specifics of how the material universe came into existence. And I believe we get tripped up on the details of how we are to interpret them. For example, The Hebrew word for day can mean both a literal day as well as some other unspecified time period. Now, we use similar words to mean similar things in our culture today. Let me give you an example. A number of people in my circle right now in 2021, when I see them for the first time in a while, they might say something like, "It's been a minute since we've seen each other." And if it had literally been just 60 seconds since we had seen each other, there would be no reason to point it out. But by saying that, both of us know what is meant by "it's been a minute." They mean it's been quite a while. So when we look at words like yom or day in Hebrew and want to take it at face value without a deeper understanding of the original language and culture, it has the potential to cause some problems in translation and interpretation. So, rather than getting caught up in the details of the specific words, let's zoom out and see what the author wanted to communicate and how he chose to do so. The first thing is that while this is a story of created things, it's first and foremost about the creator of those things and his relationship to them. Notice it doesn't start with the words, "This is the account of how the universe was created." It starts with the words, "In the beginning, God." And then it goes on to say, God created the heavens and the earth. So the statement is that there is a being that is outside of time and space who exists eternally and who chose to create something. And this is not unique to Judaism or Christianity. Nearly every ancient civilization has their own stories of how things came to be. But what is unique about this account is how the Creator relates to that which He creates. In most every creation account, maybe all of them, the one or the ones who create do so for their own benefit. People, for example, are made to serve the gods. But in this account, the act of creation was for the benefit of the people the Creator would eventually create. Then we look at how the author chose to communicate that. In this case, it was through an epic poem that is brilliantly and beautifully composed. It starts with this section or stanza about God, His existence in the beginning and His presence hovering over the surface of the deep. And then we get 3 offset pairs of stanzas about His creative works that each occur on a different day of creation. The first of each set of stanzas, days 1, 2, and 3, are about the spaces that were created. And then the second pair of each set, days 4, 5, and 6, are about the things that fill each of those spaces. Let me show you. On day 1, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And He separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day and the darkness night. Then on day 4, He created the sun, moon, and stars to govern the day and the night. On day 2, He separated the waters below from the waters above, and He created the sky and the sea. Then on day 5, He created living creatures to fill the sky and the sea. And then on day 3, it was a creation of dry land and vegetation. And on day 6, the creation of living things to inhabit the land, including humanity. Then we get another section or stanza about these humans, and we learn that they were created in the image of God, the Creator. Isn't that interesting? This poem that's composed of these 3 parallel sections is bookended on one end by a picture of this eternal God and Creator, and on the other end, humanity, who bears the image of that Creator and is given similar purpose and authority in all of those created spaces over all of those created things. And the intention is that they would dwell together with the Creator in that created space. Hang on to that thought. We'll get back to that in just a minute. There's one other thing we have to consider when we read Genesis chapter 1. Remember earlier I mentioned that much of the conflict and tension around this passage stems from an understanding that it's about the material creation of the universe. But John Walton makes the case in his book, The Lost World of Genesis 1, that this passage speaks more to the functional creation of the universe rather than the material creation of it. He uses the example of a person creating a computer. That person could gather all the parts and assemble them, but if they didn't work as they were intended, it would not be said that he created a computer. It's only when those parts function as intended that it would be said a computer had been created. Similarly, while it's assumed in Genesis 1 that God created all the material universe, the purpose of the text itself may be more about the functional ordering of the material universe so that it operates as it was intended and the conditions were prime for God and humanity to coexist. Ultimately, when we read Genesis 1, we have to put aside our modern worldview and our assumptions about the text and understand that we're looking at creation through the lens of an ancient Jewish worldview and their God who has proven himself faithful, powerful, just, and true time and time again, and that mankind was made in his image to live in the world he made and to be his ambassadors, his representatives to this world, to bring order from chaos, to rule faithfully and with authority, to be just and true, and to create, to use what the Creator has provided to build up and not to tear down. Genesis is not a scientific text and never was intended to be. Our modern way of thinking causes us to overlay thousands of years of thought development and scientific discovery over this ancient text and conclude in many instances that they cannot both be true. But I contend that the author of Genesis, traditionally thought to be Moses, would marvel at modern science and want to know more. I don't think he would see a conflict. His point was never to show how God created the material universe in a matter of 144 hours. Could he have done so? Absolutely. Did he do so? Maybe. His point was to show us a picture of a God who desires relationship with his creation and who pursues even though we mess up. How does this content mesh with your understanding of the creation account in Genesis? I'd love to read your responses in the comments below, but as you consider commenting, please know that I'm not here to debate or argue one way or another. I love this conversation, and while it has served to bolster my faith, I recognize it continues to be a primary issue for many in the deconstruction of theirs. So if you want to join the conversation, I welcome honest and thoughtful dialogue and encourage the same with one another as you respond. There's more to come in this series of videos that I'm both excited and a little nervous about. But if you found this video particularly helpful, be sure to let me know by liking it and consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the new content when it drops. If you're interested in more of what this channel has to offer, click on one of the thumbnails you're about to see, and I'll see you in the next one.